It is actually like a little cockroach. You squish it, but it lives. Hi, my name is Sydney, welcome back to hell. And as per usual, before we launch in, today's video is sponsored by Hanley. Now, while people have been discussing the downfall of Disney for literally years, it's like some wishful thinking over there, I have noticed a resurgence of interest in this issue in the last number of months. Because as time wears on at the little mouse palace, things are getting increasingly dicey. And for some pathological reason that we don't have time to unpack in this video, people are very gleeful about this potential downfall. And I'm not judging any of you because I can kind of relate. They keep killing the things I love. Personally, I like to weigh in on what Disney is doing when it interferes with the things that I care about, namely the classics and the beloved movies that I grew up with as a child. Because like many of you, I imagine, I'm not super comfortable with people messing with my nostalgia. Just like, let me have this one thing. So of course, when I saw that there was a Bambi remake on the horizon, my alarm bells started ringing. Bambi is definitely one of those Disney movies that we all saw as children, but it doesn't necessarily come to mind immediately when you think about the company's most popular animated films. But even if it isn't your favorite, I'm willing to bet it still made a mark on you because it deals with some pretty heavy messaging. Messaging, it seems, that Disney might be removing if they have their way. In an interview with Collider, writer and director Lindsay Anderson Beer, who was formerly working on the live-action Bambi, cryptically discussed some changes that would likely take place in the new film. She said that lots of children, particularly from my generation, have never seen the original Bambi, and it doesn't appeal to a wider audience because it deals with the death of a parent. Several outlets and lots of people across the internet have taken this to mean that Disney would be removing or changing Bambi's mother's death scene. And while we obviously don't know for certain, it does sound like they'll be changing it or softening it if they don't remove it entirely. You're gonna do the Deer movie, Disney? The Deer movie, really? Now, this revelation got me thinking about Disney's track record when it comes to running beloved classic films and franchises right into the dirt. And it seems in the last number of years especially, this trend has only accelerated, leaving many of us to wonder why Disney is doing the things that it's doing, given that there's no tangible net positive to many of its actions. The Mouse Palace is suffering all over, and personally, I find that very interesting. Disney's focus has not been on meaningful storytelling for quite some time, and honestly it shows, not only in the content that we're being endlessly exposed to, but also in how Disney is doing overall. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The Disney death spiral, the many things that feed into it, and why they might be experiencing, finally, an actual downfall. But before you once again board my hell gondola, and together we traverse the waters into the depths of sadness, clutching each other like Jack and Rose on the Titanic, let's hear from today's sponsor, Hanley. Men, I know the beauty industry makes self-care feel very complicated and expensive. It's why you feel a need to buy your 8-in-1 shower bottles. It's why you keep being gifted the same man fume that you said you liked once in passing and now it's your signature smell. And as far as skincare goes, you're a little bit confused by the eye cream that your wife bought you because you don't understand the purpose of putting cucumber mush on your face. I don't even like cucumber. But men, let me tell you, skincare doesn't have to be complicated and expensive, thanks to Hanley. Hanley has simplified skincare for men, making it easier to stick to and maintain. It also offers several different levels of products to address all sorts of skin concerns, like acne or anti-aging. But if you're looking for something simple, level 1 is a great place to start. This comes with all the basics: a daily face wash, an exfoliating scrub, an AM moisturizer with SPF 20, and a PM moisturizer. And the best part is, every Hanley box comes with an instruction card that tells you when and how to use each product and in what order. And becoming a Hanley member comes with lots of benefits, including 20% off the retail price, the ability to customize your order, and canceling or pausing your subscription at any time. So if you are a man who wants beautiful skin, then click the link in the description for 30% off your first box plus a free gift. In 1923, a young Walt Disney scrounged together enough money to buy a one-way train ticket to Los Angeles, California. He brought with him an unfinished reel of a work called Alice's Wonderland. Before his move, Disney had put the last of his money into the project. His studio, Laugh-O-Gram, which seemed to have financial trouble since day one, eventually went bankrupt, but not before finishing the raw edits of the 12-minute film. Despite the setbacks, Walt Disney would not be deterred. Alice's Wonderland was eventually purchased by Winkler Pictures, and Disney was contracted to produce 6 more films in what would later become the Alice comedy series. In order to produce all this content, Walt, along with his brother Roy, founded Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio, which later became the Walt Disney Productions and then the Walt Disney Company. By 1928, Mickey Mouse was introduced to the world with the release of Steamboat Willie. This single character would become one of Disney's most recognizable creations. Less than a decade later, Disney had experienced tremendous success with his Mickey Mouse shorts and set his sights on producing a full feature film. That film, coincidentally, would be Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The project went 400% over budget, required hundreds of staff and animators just to get it off the ground, but it was a raging success when it finally debuted at the end of 1937. This marked the beginning of Disney's incredibly well-loved and recognizable animated films. Despite its flaws and money troubles over the years, Disney seemed to understand itself as an early innovator of animation. And as time wore on, and particularly after the death of Walt Disney, the company began to expand and diversify within the world of entertainment. Today, it has evolved into a media empire, spanning across different mediums including news, entertainment, and animation. It has launched its own streaming service, Disney+, opened hotels, and even theme parks across the world, which has managed to spawn an entire generation of mostly weird adults who go to these places regularly. Like, there's this weird social thing where people want to judge adults who play video games, but like, maybe we should all be collectively judging the year-round ticket holders for Disneyland who don't have any kids. I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting to take stabs at anyone this early in the video. So with all of these things in mind, why does it suddenly feel like Disney's ability to bounce back might finally have come to an end? Maybe because it has. Or maybe the company will once again avoid death like the little cockroach that it is. Now, to understand where Disney is at now, it's important to consider many of its key moves over the years. In the late 1930s, Walt Disney did 2 important things. He released his first feature-length film, Snow White, and he reportedly expressed desire to acquire the rights to the book series Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh was a beloved classic, or I guess it still is a beloved classic, and Disney's Snow White had dominated with audiences during its initial release, marking it as one of his most successful initiatives to date. But only a short time later, in 1944, Disney was struggling financially. Despite producing some well-liked films over the years, the company decided to re-release Snow White in order to generate much-needed revenue. 20-something years later, in 1961, Walt Disney finally got his wish when Disney purchased the film and merchandising rights to Winnie the Pooh, effectively crystallizing what would become one of their biggest revenue streams to date. Walt Disney would ironically pass away the same year that Disney released its first Winnie the Pooh short, in 1966. And just left all the incoming legal battles for everybody else. Great timing, Walter. Now, it may come as a surprise to some people, but Disney's current way of doing things, acquiring massive media properties, re-releasing films, absorbing competitors, aggressive expansion, is not a new phenomenon. Because as much as we like to criticize Disney in its current form, it's always seemed to understand that things change, and if it intended to keep up, it needed to change too. Some of these innovations were undoubtedly great, such as the 1955 opening of Disneyland, the 1983 launch of the Disney Channel, and even the 1993 acquisition of Miramax, which was eventually rescinded because Harvey Weinstein. But as Disney entered the early 2000s, its purchases of media properties accelerated, and some of these acquisitions would end up being the undoing of what were once considered unkillable franchises. In 2021, Disney CEO Bob Iger said that Pixar was probably the best acquisition he made during his time with the company. And maybe that's true for the business, but certainly not for viewers. I mean, I enjoy a good animated film as much as the next guy, but I can't for the life of me understand what the hell Inside Out was. Like, I know that people liked that that film a lot and it did really well, but for me, this is just like nightmare fuel. So you basically have the main character, little girl's brain friend. Wait, what are they called? Imaginary friend, who just gets thrown down into this dark, sad place where he will dissolve into nothingness and be forgotten. And the girl, main character's emotional controller person, is just like, this is fine.
Take her to the moon for me, okay?
People use the audio from this scene on TikTok to reference their dogs dying. So what, we remove Bambi's mom dying because that's too much, but this is fine? Good God. The relationship between Disney and Pixar was forged back in 1991, when the two companies signed a co-production agreement to create 3 animated films, one of them being 1995's Toy Story. This led to another contract in 1997 that detailed producing an additional 5 movies together over the next decade. Before Disney acquired Pixar in 2006, the studio had produced films such as A Bug's Life, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles. The animation style was fresh and new, and Disney had to have been aware that audiences were intrigued by this new style of storytelling. And it showed. Pixar's earlier films were insanely successful. And although Disney was still giving us bangers in the 90s, like Mulan, The Lion King, and Pocahontas, the company was still using 2D animation in a world that was advancing technologically at an insane rate. Disney was floundering. It had to innovate, and what better way to do that than buying out a competitor? For a time, the Disney-Pixar alliance was a good one. The studio continued to create some great films such as Up and WALL-E, and with the help of several new hires, Disney also made some notable films like Frozen and Moana. But since the mid-2010s, the interest in Pixar movies has slowly declined, with the newest releases barely making a blip on anyone's radar. And that probably sounds familiar, given it's the same story for the Marvel and Star Wars franchises. Except the films and shows and whatever else associated with these properties do make a blip. But it's like a bunch of bad blips. Like the kind of blips where you're watching it and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know who signed off on this or who even asked for this, but they're probably the human equivalent of drinking paint thinner. Marvel had been through a series of highs and lows since it first debuted the character Captain America in 1941. By 1996, the company was bankrupt and its future was pretty uncertain. But the ray of hope came in the form of several successful movies in the late 90s and early 2000s: Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man, each of which was based on Marvel characters or comics. Of course, all of these were made by other companies that licensed Marvel characters, but it was here that Marvel itself realized that maybe they could make their own movies using their own intellectual property. After getting a $525 million loan and putting up their entire catalog as collateral, Marvel Studios released Iron Man to audiences in 2008, and it was a hit. A year later, in 2009, Disney slithered in and bought Marvel for $4 billion. Just like Pixar, for a period, this acquisition gave us some of the most successful and notable films in modern entertainment, which also came with the added bonus of grossing $22 billion worldwide. Oh my god. Superhero films, to put it lightly, were very in. People loved them, and these movies were able to generate an engaged cult-like following. In 2012, Disney made yet another critical purchase and took Lucasfilm off the market, which gave it access to both Star Wars and Indiana Jones. There isn't some fancy backstory to this one, it's mostly just that George Lucas wanted to spend more time with his family. You know, he wanted to hang out with his daughter and retire. Do some crocheting in the backyard, as I hear retired people do. From this point, it really seemed like Disney was unstoppable. For the last number of decades, they'd been buying competitors, acquiring massive media properties, even buying entire catalogs of intellectual property, and on top of that, they were making some really good content. 2016 was a massive year. Disney grossed $3 billion at the domestic box office. In 2018, the studio would outperform itself by $91.5 million. But this wouldn't last. And it definitely didn't. I personally think that 2015 was actually when these franchises and movies and whatnot really started to drop off, but 2018 definitely signaled the end. And some of you might be thinking here, yes, logically Disney fell off given that a big global event happened in 2019 that stopped everyone in their tracks. But right before that really got underway and started messing with things significantly, Disney launched its own streaming service, Disney Plus, which sort of came at the right time if you consider the fact that people were about to be locked in their homes with very little to do. And with Disney owning so many media properties, there was tons of content to watch and choose from, right? Technically right, because there was, but wrong. Through its purchases of so many additional media properties, Disney did have access to a wide range of entertainment, but having its own streaming service that exclusively housed its own content meant that it must produce more and more films and shows to stay fresh and relevant. The problem is that Disney completely oversaturated its own market, and trying to pump out this much content means that the stories will inevitably suffer. Prior to about 2015, Disney did seem somewhat invested in creating films that were both meaningful and memorable, and this applied to the Marvel Universe, Star Wars, and even Pixar. But the introduction of Disney Plus signaled the end of the innovation era for all of these media properties. It's not to say that some good content hasn't been made since 2018, but it's clear that the emphasis has shifted from innovating, pushing the envelope and enthralling audiences, to squeezing every last dollar from these IPs to feed the ever-hungry Disney Plus machine. Because of the groundwork put into these franchises over the decades, be it the Star Wars cult following cultivated from the original movies, the cult following for Marvel with the comic books and the action figures and so on, and even the nostalgic love for early Disney animations, audiences were uniquely invested in seeing where their beloved series and movies would go. This would explain the initial interest in Disney's live-action remakes like Cinderella and Alice in Wonderland, and the initial interest in Star Wars sequel trilogy, which quickly and easily totally lost the plot. This would also explain the insane success of Marvel's Infinity Saga. I'd also be really remiss here if I didn't add that there's actually nothing wrong at all with sequels and spin-offs and what have you. In fact, basically every media property that we're talking about here has had them since the outset. But the difference between then and now is that they were released as a continuation of a meaningful story. They were well-timed and well-placed and released with intention. Like, I remember watching The Little Mermaid 2 Return to the Sea like 400 times when I was younger. And of course, this also applies to Pixar, who followed up several of their films with a sequel that outperformed the original, which I feel like isn't that hard to do? I don't know, and I can't be bothered Googling it. The point is, most of these sequels were wanted by audiences. They were necessary, and they weren't there to simply feed a streaming service machine. And I guess this is one of the reasons why Disney's new creations are doing so poorly. They have oversaturated audiences with the same thing over and over and are showing no signs of stopping. Star Wars Ahsoka, The Mandalorian, Andor, Star Wars The Bad Batch, Obi-Wan Kenobi, The Book of Boba Fett, Star Wars Skeleton Crew, Loki, The Marvels, Echo, Deadpool 3, Thunderbolts, Blade. Wait a minute, why am I just now finding out that they're remaking Blade? Why do they ruin all the things I love? This makes me feel pain. This is why it's so hard to like pop culture things, because they'll just take it from you. And then that'll be that. After a while of this happening again and again and again, it becomes quite clear that it's nothing more than a cash grab. But I suppose we should have seen it coming, given that all the way back in 2015, it was reported that Disney intended to make Star Wars a forever franchise, putting out a new Star Wars movie every year until we all die in a nuclear explosion. I guess the point is, these movies used to feel like an event, something that you could look forward to sometimes for years, and then rush to see when it was finally released. But now, it's exhausting to try to keep up with all these films and shows. And the sad thing is, even if you miss one of them, you actually didn't miss anything at all. The irony about all of this is that rather than winning people over to Disney Plus and making them forever fans, the streaming service is struggling and people are more disconnected than ever. And I think that's for a few additional reasons. Firstly, and sadly, the quality of stories being told by these films and shows are so lacking that even if something noteworthy was produced, it's unlikely audiences would take the time to watch it. Disney has essentially burned whatever trust it once had with viewers. Secondly, the storytelling is weak and people are sick and tired of all the unnecessary political messaging, including the race swaps, changes to storylines, and leaving out key moments that underscore character development. Like Bambi's mother dying. Probably. And this shows on a monetary level. Disney Plus lost 4 million subscribers in the second quarter of 2023, and several months ago, outlets were reporting that Disney lost close to $1 billion on box office flops. It is estimated the company lost over $890 million on its last 8 studio releases, which include Lightyear, Thor: Love and Thunder, Strange World, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania? The Little Mermaid, and Elemental. We can also throw in the new Indiana Jones film, which just recently dragged itself over its box office budget, and once again, according to reports, is likely not remotely close to breaking even. Now, I do have to add that there seem to be a bunch of speculated financial reasons for this happening, such as Disney only releasing its content to Disney Plus, and some of its films never actually making it to the cinema, which effectively does two things. Obviously, people are not buying tickets to those films, but also it's taking billions of dollars in contracts off the table with third-party contractors like Netflix and Amazon. And also Disney's insane film budgets, most of which are still hundreds of millions of dollars, more than similar films being produced. Stop this. But those things aside, I think that audiences continue to be disgruntled, disinterested, and mistrusting. And I think that's another key point to this topic. Disney is fundamentally at odds with its audience. People love to talk about wokeism in Hollywood because it is so on the nose that it's very challenging to overlook. And it's easy to see and point out how many films and television shows exist for the almost sole purpose of pushing corporate feminism down everyone's throats. Some recent notable examples of this would be She-Hulk, Thor: Love and Thunder, and even the new Snow White. I am prematurely making that determination, but I doubt I'll be wrong, because the older I get, every day is Groundhog Day. The overemphasis on politics in Disney's creations is so out of hand that in September 2023, Disney CEO Bob Iger said that the company will quiet the noise in the culture wars. He also made similar comments in 2022 when Iger participated in a town hall with employees, suggesting he would pump the brakes on the company's political involvement. The bottom line is that people are starving for non-politicized entertainment, but with Disney, they get it at every turn. And like I've talked about on this channel at length previously, this political social justice messaging doesn't only get shoved into Disney's new films and remakes, but all the bloody marketing as well. And because Disney's live-action adaptations make the mistake of misunderstanding the original source material, viewers end up disappointed when they see the magic sucked out of the films that we grew up watching as children. Us 80s and 90s babies grew up with quality content that had all the hallmarks of great storytelling, fully fleshed out characters, meaningful messaging, and it helps that most of these movies looked really excellent. In 2023, these things seem to be traits of a bygone era, except the nice lookingness. I guess that seems to take precedence over creative storylines these days. And it's here that we see the decline of Pixar's new films such as Elemental, Lightyear, and Soul, all of which I bet you didn't even care enough about to see or even know existed. It's also where we see the decline of Marvel and Star Wars. Yes, these films look great, and yes, there are explosions and people jumping around, but the storylines and the creativity just aren't really there. In a way, all of this destroys the legacy these franchises once had. It's worth noting that Disney's downfall doesn't only concern visual entertainment. At the beginning of 2023, it was reported that Disney was laying off thousands of employees, which has only continued to get worse. There are discussions that parts of the media empire will be sold off, and Disney even closed its Star Wars hotel after only operating for 19 months. And as far as the many Disney theme parks and resorts and whatever, I was reading that Bob Iger intends to put a ton of money into these with the intention of building them to be bigger and better as the years go on, but who's to say how that will go? Obviously, and it goes without saying, there is a lot more to be said about this topic because it is a massive one and I've only scratched the surface. But I think the bottom line here is that what we are currently seeing from Disney isn't actually all that new, and like I already mentioned, the company is kind of like a little cockroach that will survive basically anything. This isn't the first time that Disney has lost a ton of money on multiple projects, and it certainly isn't the first time that it's decided to branch out and expand. The difference is, at least in my opinion, that in the past, Disney was able to do something meaningful with the brands and the media properties it absorbed. It was able to produce meaningful content and continue to build upon what it was already good at, and it wasn't at odds with its viewership. Even the messaging in Disney's earlier films was there to reflect the attitudes of audiences at the time. Now it tries to force audiences to abide by Disney's views, values, and social justice initiatives. The reality is that Disney bought a bunch of massive media properties without any real foresight and forethought about how that might progress as times go on and as times change. Not to mention, a bunch of big brains at the company apparently thought it would be a great idea to keep re-releasing and squeezing the essence out of their existing catalog. Most of Hollywood seems to be focused on forced diversity, corporate feminism, and shoving social justice initiatives down everyone's throats. And honestly, Disney is right there along with them. Disrespecting fans, picking weird, unnecessary political fights, inserting social justice initiatives into its films, squeezing the life out of franchises and classics, that is what Disney currently seems to be very good at. And in the end, while I don't see a world where Disney necessarily completely disappears from the media map, at least for the time being, it's doing a fantastic job at undoing its own legacy. Now, before I open the floor to all of you, this is just a reminder to check out Tish Hanley using the link in the description. Start your man skincare journey, and your face will thank you. Now, open the floor to all of you. What do you all think? Are you somebody who is bothered by what Disney is currently doing? Do you think that it's actually not that big of a deal and in fact they're kind of too big to fail? Do you like the new Star Wars movies and television shows and whatnot? Do you like the new Marvel movies and television shows and whatnot? And what do you generally make of this issue overall? As always, if you have made it this far in the video, congratulations, I'm glad you're here. If you are not subscribed already, feel free to do so if you want to see more of me and more of this kind of content. Obviously, leave me comments because I do read the majority of them and I really like to hear what you guys think about these topics and these issues. And as always, I will see you pretty people in the next video.